राष्ट्रपति पुतिन, राष्ट्रपति शी, राष्ट्रपति रामाफोसा, राष्ट्रपति बोल्सोनारो, नमस्कार। ब्रिक्स शिखर वार्ता में आप सभी का बहुत स्वागत है। ब्रिक्स की 15वीं वर्षगांठ पर इस समिट की अध्यक्षता करना मेरे लिए और भारत के लिए खुशी की बात है।
Hello and thanks for tuning in to Global Chit Chat, our weekly show where we take a look at the top developments across the world over the last 7 days with our guest and expert, Tridevesh Singh Meni. Thank you very much, sir, for being here as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.
At the top, sir, let's take a look at the Brics meeting that happened last week. Most of the players there have some stake in South Asia where volatile developments are happening. And besides that also, sir, what do you think are the biggest takeaways from Brics?
Okay, see, first of all, even in spite of the changing geopolitical situation, in spite of the tensions between India and China, BRICS as a group is important in terms of, if you look at, basically you have 5 of the largest developing economies in the world. They account for a significant percentage of GDP, of trade, right? Obviously of the global population and all. So this, in spite of all the tensions, in spite of the bickering, so symbolically BRICS is important. That's the first thing. Second, China wants to send out a message that, it is willing to, for very long, there's been a belief that, okay, there is a vacuum, but China is not able to fill that vacuum. And, what is often called the Kindleberger trap, that the leading power does not take global responsibility for providing certain public services and all that. So China has been sending out that message and many multilateral platforms, and this is no exception in that sense. Now, if you look at it specifically from the context of India, China, and Russia, first of all, the fact that last year China had supported the BRICS summit being held in India. This was after the thaw in February 2021. Second, if you look at the statement which emerged after the BRICS summit, and if you look at the tone and tenor of that, if you look at the remarks of the Russian president and you compare them with that of President Xi Jinping, there's a difference. So the joint statement clearly speaks about the threats in terms of terrorism and the fact that the government in the interim government in Afghanistan, it should be more inclusive, without going too much into specifics. But there is a clear flagging of these points by the joint statement, right? Then you have Xi Jinping. President Xi Jinping was more guarded, and he spoke about other issues related to BRICS. Whereas the Russian president categorically spoke about terrorism, and he referred to Afghanistan. He flagged the threats. So you see that in recent weeks, Russia and China have not been. Obviously, they have more convergence because of the mutual rivalry with the US, but they're not 100% on the same page as far as Afghanistan is concerned. There's no absolute convergence. So I think this summit was important from that context. And Russia has also been reiterating the fact that India should be playing a more important role in Afghanistan. So I think the focus of this summit was more on Afghanistan, and it was of course about symbolism as well. And for India also, it was important to send out a message that obviously that we are closer to the US. In recent days, India has been getting close to the US, but at the same time, foreign policy, you also need a certain balance. So the fact that obviously you have China and Russia on board the BRICS grouping is important in that context of sending out the right signaling.
Speaking about China and Afghanistan, so China has offered assistance to Afghanistan. It was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with that country post-Taliban takeover. So what do you think, sir, can you elaborate on China's interests in that country?
So obviously they have interests in natural resources. If Afghanistan is also important from the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, as we have said earlier. And since 2014, China has been increasing its role. But on the ground, China has not done that much because of security constraints and things like that. Now, by offering assistance, obviously China thinks that it has a first mover advantage. But again, it's not, because even other countries have already started saying that, as far as humanitarian aid and assistance is concerned, in fact, at the United Nations, other countries have also said that, that we need to distinguish between our apprehensions about the interim government and between the Afghan people. So, given the fact that the posturing of the Taliban has also been such that they've repeatedly said that China is a preferred as far as economic investment is concerned, it's our preferred partner, and the fact that China has also tried to, has not been as critical of the Taliban. It has expressed its apprehensions, but not been as critical as, say, the West. So that way, China obviously is important. But both China and the Taliban also realize that they cannot, other countries also need to play the role. This includes not just Russia, so China, for instance, has been getting other neighbors of Afghanistan on board as well, right? In China, for instance, we've discussed the last week that China understands the role of Iran, of Central Asian neighbors, right? So at this point of time, yes, given the messaging which is coming out of Beijing, China is the most important player, but other countries have a role to play as well. And they're beginning to now, there has been a change even in the posture of other countries which are apprehensive about the Taliban now vis-a-vis even the interim government. So as as events unfold, we'll be in a better position to comment.
Also, sir, last week, President Biden and Xi Jinping, they were on a phone call. So what do you make of that conversation between two countries that are already seeing some tension, that are already competing with each other?
I think so far, the Biden administration's policy vis-a-vis China has been similar to that of the Trump administration, right? But after Afghanistan, obviously there's a change. There has been more communication. China also, if you look at China's criticism of the US withdrawal, that means China actually acknowledges the US importance, in the context of Afghanistan. Repeatedly, China has been criticizing the US for withdrawal of troops. US senior officials from the US have also been in touch with the counterparts, right? So, and in terms of certain apprehensions with regard to the government being inclusive, women's rights and all, China and the US are on the same page. But that's obviously at this point of time, Afghanistan is the most important issue. But Biden also realizes that he needs to have a working relationship with Xi Jinping. And obviously now next week the US is hosting the in-person summit of Quad leaders. So there has to be a sort of balancing act. China has, of course, been critical of that. But I think both Beijing and Washington realize that the world order may be evolving. US may be in era of US exceptionalism may be over. But Beijing also, as I said earlier, is not totally in a position to fill that gap. So you have to work together. And it remains to be seen because whether both leaders will have an in-person sort of meeting, because I don't think so far the indicators are that the Chinese president will not be attending the G20 meeting in October. But I think it's probably basically the US also realizes that it has so many geopolitical challenges, domestic challenges. You need to slightly balance out. The aggressive stances of China will not really help. You need to get some space, right? And Beijing, on the other hand, also realizes that it alone cannot sort of fulfill, the responsibility. You need to work on the same page.
Lastly, sir, let's come to the green card issue here. This can be some relief to people who are waiting for permanent residency in US, I understand, can benefit Indians. US bill is proposing a green card for a fee. What do you think the purpose of this is and who all can it benefit?
So basically at this point of time, so if you look at it, there are limits. So there are country caps on green cards. There are annual quotas for H-1Bs. There is also, an issue that in terms of green cards for professionals, there is a limit for each country. I think it's probably 7%. So as a result, professionals from Asia, especially for professionals from India and China, they have a major problem. But specifically, if I want to look at the current potential, because this is called the reconciliation package. If it actually goes through and if it's accepted, yes, it will give some sort of reprieve to the professionals who have been stranded. Because what happens is, when you're on an H-1B visa, there's uncertainty in terms of your economic future, whether you should make investments, for instance, whether you should not. There are those dilemmas. So this will address that, but the long-term issues are still not addressed. So as I was saying, for instance, if you look at green cards, the country cap is a major issue. If you were to look at the annual the quota for H-1Bs, that still remains an issue. Also, you're addressing the problems of legal immigrants, right? You're not looking at a lot. In fact, even some of the policymakers who have there are 40 US lawmakers who've actually been behind what is called as reconciliation package, but they also admit that this in the short term it's okay for professionals and all, but there are a lot of other issues which need to be addressed. So and I think it's also the Biden administration also needs to send out a message that its immigration policies are significantly different from that of the Trump administration. It welcomes professionals and things like that. But I think there are limitations. The domestic discourse in the US is such that you can only go so far. So in the short run, yes, especially for Indian professionals, for tech professionals and all, it is a relief. But there are other issues. In the long run, there are issues which other countries also need to lobby for, in terms of the limit caps which are there on whether it's on green card, whether it's on H-1B and things like that. This will require, I think, for this to happen, there also has to be a significant shift in the domestic discourse of the US, because there is a bipartisan sort of consensus that that the US needs to look within. It needs to address issues like domestic unemployment, and also the fact that that basically priority should be given to US professionals and all. And also there is also an argument of many that for very long these H-1B visas have been sort of benefited certain countries, including India, disproportionately. So that narrative needs to be countered. But I think what is also needed is that as far as there has to be more concerted lobbying, even by the countries concerned themselves, apart from the policymakers within the US, because obviously these people who are green card holders or whatever, they also indirectly, if you look at whether you look at remittances, whether you look at things like that, they do contribute significantly to the economy back home. So these issues need to be prioritized more at that.
Right, sir. Devesh, sir, thanks very much for being on the show today, and look forward to having you with us next week.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.